Although Clark County is just across the Columbia River to our north, many Portlanders regard it as another country, a place that's different. After all, Clark County isn't even in Oregon. It has separate license plates, automobile drivers who sometimes seem to have taken a different test than Oregonians do to get their licenses, unfamiliar growth patterns, and a tax structure that includes the unthinkable, a sales tax. I want to pause here, by the way, and give credit for much of this introduction to one of our people up here, Commissioner Blumenauer in his office, who forwarded some ideas which I thought were particularly relevant to what we were going to say today. Different doesn't necessarily mean apart. From the federal government's perspective, Clark County's biggest city, Vancouver, and its environs are part of the standard metropolitan statistical area for the Portland region. But for over 40,000 Clark County citizens who commute to Oregon daily for their jobs, the connection is much more real as they cross over 2 Columbia River bridges to work. And some 12,000 Oregonians travel the other way to Clark County for their jobs. Clark County is a key player in this region. Today, it's not the semi-rural county it was a generation ago. It's the fastest growing county in the state of Washington, and it's home to 1 out of every 4 metropolitan area residents. Vancouver is the 4th largest city in the region. How is Clark County responding to this stunning growth and change? How will the responses affect the rest of the Portland metropolitan area? How does Clark County and its residents view the trend toward greater regional cooperation? What are the areas of common interest and involvement? What differences are most important as inhibitors to cooperation and coordination? And what about the recent no vote on Clark County Light Rail? Is there a chance that our neighbors to the north will yet be connected to us through this system? We're fortunate to have with us today important decision makers in Clark County to help address these and other questions. John Magnano, seated to my right next to Commissioner Blumenauer, has been one of 3 Clark County commissioners for the past 7 years. His additional public responsibilities have included membership on the board of C-TRAN, which is Clark County's transit system, of the Southwest Washington Regional Transportation Council, and the Washington State Air Transportation Commission. Commissioner Magnano served as chair of the Washington State High-Speed Ground Transportation Commission and previously of his local neighborhood association and coalition group. Prior to his election to the Clark County Board, he was a social services administrator. Our second Clark County leader, Les White, sitting to Commissioner Magnano's right, has run the C-TRAN system for more than a decade. He came to C-TRAN in 1982 as executive director after experience as general manager of Fort Wayne's Public Transportation Commission and director of Kalamazoo, Michigan's transit system. Mr. White has been highly active in regional, state, and national transit and transportation forums, and has long worked closely with TriMet in efforts to improve service for the rush hour commute. He's currently chair of the American Public Transport Association's Legislative Committee and a member of that organization's Transit 2000 Committee. To moderate today's discussion and to keep the tough questions before our guest from Clark County, we're pleased to have Portland City Commissioner Earl Blumenauer with us on the program. For much of his 2 decades in local and state office, Commissioner Blumenauer has taken a leadership role in regional and state transportation matters, including support for improvement of Oregon's roads and promotion of the regional's light rail system and other alternatives to the automobile. Elected to his 3rd term on the Portland City Council last spring, Earl remains responsible for the city's Office of Transportation. For 4 years, he was also responsible for the City Planning Bureau, during which time the Central City Plan was adopted and the zoning code rewritten. Please join me in welcoming our guest today. We'll begin with Commissioner Blumenauer.
Thank you, Don. in our discussions in terms of how best to fulfill this really unique opportunity to talk about the relationship, we concluded that it would be important to lay out some of the context in terms of why the subject today is important to people who live on this side of the river. At one of the first meetings I had running for a position on the Portland City Council, I was asked at one of these brown bags that architects are wont to sponsor by, I think, a longtime City Club member, Ray Boucher, what my strategy was dealing with Clark County in the city of Vancouver. It was really a matter of first impression for me. I really hadn't had that tossed to me in that fashion. And in the course of the discussion that ensued, it was clear that this was a large and significant portion of the responsibility in terms of managing that relationship and understanding our responsibilities. It's a lesson that I hope that I haven't forgotten. Indeed, during the recent ill-fated campaign I had for mayor, in the midst of one of our strategy sessions, some of my advisors looked at the calendar that I had and found that there were all sorts of bizarre meetings that I was having with other city councils around the region, coffees, neighborhood coffees from Oak Grove to Vancouver. And the question was raised, maybe I wouldn't have some additional success if I would do some public appearances where people might be able to actually vote for me. Well, there was a lively discussion that ensued from there, and they were unable to conclude whether or not I would, in fact, be benefited by more exposure to my constituents. But putting aside the political aspects of that, I think the facts remain that it is good government for people who seek to represent people on this side of the river to understand those regional connections. And there is no regional relationship that is more important nor more complex than that with our neighbors to the north. It is important to Portland, and I would like to touch on three elements that we might use as a context to jump off for our conversation. First, dealing with the economics. Don mentioned the fact that there are over 40,000 people from Clark County who make their way across the river to Oregon every day to earn their living. And 12,000 Oregonians who make that trek across the river to Vancouver. And in fact, that is one of the largest and most rapidly growing sources of employment for our citizens. The fact that we are #1 in retail sales per capita in the nation probably has something to do with the fact that we do have these 40,000 Washingtonians here every day, and I'm sure scrupulously observing the letter and the spirit of the tax laws. Because they are both good citizens, and who knows when they might want to run for Congress, right? But nonetheless, you look at the parking lots of our shopping centers, Clackamas Town Center, Lloyd Center, the license plates downtown at Costco, and you see that there are literally thousands of people who are here enriching our local economy. And looking around the room, I see any number of you who are involved with law firms, with financial institutions, with businesses that benefit from the magnitude of the economic activity. It is good for our region that we have this critical mass and we're working together. Additionally, being a politician, I'd like to footnote the political cooperation. The fact is that we are a small metropolitan area in an obscure section of the United States. The city of Portland is not the most popular entity in our state legislature, and I'm told from some of our friends across the river that sometimes the people in Olympia assume that Clark County is just going to be represented by Salem, that it is a potential of being lost in the shuffle. But by working together on our joint political infrastructure investments environmentally, we've been able to achieve remarkable success, unique in some cases in the nation, because we've been able to have sound, thoughtful plans that unite, in some cases, 3 United States senators on the appropriations committees, sometimes more than 4 congresspeople, and really be able to get the job done. And finally, just reflecting on the various differences that may help define the 2 parts of our metropolitan area. That, too, is a strength for metropolitan Portland. The fact that we are different, that we have opportunities for people to take advantage of different preferences for housing, for the lifestyle of their neighborhood, even their tolerance for different types of taxes, helps enrich and make our community more viable. It bodes well for our being able to take advantage of future opportunities. And we'll put aside for a moment the commuter link between Portland and Vancouver and issues of air quality and congestion. But let me talk about another area of congestion, the I-5 corridor. From Eugene to the other Vancouver, BC, we are tied together in a unique environmental, unique economic entity, tremendous congestion along the I-5 corridor. A number of people in this room are actively working, and John Magnano's had a lot of leadership in the high-speed rail connection. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we don't need some sort of esoteric bullet train for a relatively modest expenditure when you compare it to widening I-5 or adding airport capacity to either C-TRAN or the Portland airport. We have the potential of taking existing Amtrak technology that's in use in the system. We may be able to get it cheap depending on what the federal government does in the months ahead. And with track upgrade, we can run service from Portland's transit mall to Seattle's transit mall with a stop in Vancouver, Olympia, and C-TRAN in about 2 hours. This is part of what we can focus on together and accomplish in the months ahead, not just in the years ahead, in terms of making real progress. The second area deals with our economy, and I would mention two references. One is in the global and increasingly global economic picture, the potential for our working together with the Port of Vancouver, the Port of Portland, not through a lot of bizarre governmental structure, but simple, straightforward intergovernmental agreements with contracts, doing a lot more working together in a cooperative fashion, not competing, not undercutting, but being able to focus on the markets that serve our greater metropolitan area, and for that matter, the whole Inland Empire, Columbia River Basin area. The second has to do with our approach to local economic development. We do not have to be involved with the sort of suicidal effort to undercut each other bidding for new business to locate at the expense of our ability to service existing business and provide the services that our citizens want to maintain livability. We've come a long way from the dark times of about 10 years ago when we were faxing to one another's competitors negative news clippings in an effort to discourage them. You know, sort of like McDonald's jumping on the Jack in the Box, you know, talking about how those hamburgers weren't quite cooked enough and they kill you. Ultimately, it ended up that you wouldn't be buying as much fried cow. They know that. Well, we've learned not to be quite that aggressive, but we haven't gone far enough, I think, in being willing to be cooperative in terms of establishing the base, sticking by it, and getting the economic development that we want. The final point, and I'll conclude on the educational infrastructure. One of the few dark spots in our horizon, and where we are at a disadvantage to our friends to the north in Puget Sound, is we don't have the educational infrastructure. But there is a lot of exciting things that are happening. The plans for Portland State, the emergence of the campus for Washington State University in Clark County, the network of junior colleges and community colleges, the strong system of private colleges, the Health Science University, the Graduate Center. We've got the potential for the educational infrastructure. The new technologies coming forward to tie it together in terms of communication, which a number of you in this room are involved with, points towards the future. But it's working cooperatively that will enable us to capitalize and make the progress. I think the focus is our being able to take this challenge and do it in a positive way, not with the political issue du jour for a bunch of new, fresh faces, whether they're in Washington, D.C. or Olympia or Salem, but our being willing to follow through on our plans on a longer-term vision for a future with the proper time frame, which is over the next 50 years, and a constituency that is our grandchildren. Thank you very much.
Appreciated your remarks, Earl. Thank you. Special thanks to Nancy Hedin, a former employee of the City of Vancouver, and also a special thanks to my friends Ethan Seltzer of the Portland's Public Policy Institute at PSU, my friend Mike Hauk, and certainly Earl Blumenauer for this opportunity to address the Portland City Club with a Clark County perspective. I was daunted by this task, especially since many of our 300,000 citizens would say, don't tell them much about what we have in Southwest Washington. We don't want too many exploring some of our riches and some of the good things we've got on the north side of the river. But the really daunting task was 2 weeks ago on a Friday night in this very ballroom. I was charged with the responsibility of speaking to my freshman daughter's class and high school mates at a father-daughter dance, and I was charged with the responsibility of, on behalf of all of the fathers of this generation, say a few warm things about the loving relationships, the communicative relationships between father and daughter. And I survived that. My daughter didn't think I was too much of a nerd or dweeb, and we are still coexisting peacefully in our Ridgefield household together. In recent months, the relationship between Clark County and the rest of the Portland metropolitan area has found its way into a great deal of discussion on both sides of the Columbia River. The rejection of light rail by Clark County voters has been dissected, processed, analyzed, assessed, and run through the blender by a whole host of public opinion creators. And as soon as more than two of us come to the same conclusions, we'll be sure and let you know. The vote comes at an interesting point in the history of Clark County. Despite the growing interdependence of our communities, many residents on the south side of the river seem to know very little about Clark County, and there seems to be a growing disdain in some parts of Clark County for all things from Portland. Last spring, Clark County's daily paper, the Columbian, interviewed a group of leaders from the Portland community to determine what they knew about Clark County and what image Clark County held for them. The Columbian interviewed 8 people, including a Portland City Commissioner, and Charlie Hales was very positive, several area media personalities, a local historian, a priest, and I've gone to confession to him on a number of occasions since then, the manager of a major downtown Portland hotel, and the director of an area arts organization. And the general impression was along the lines of, Clark County, isn't that the place with all the mobile homes that you drive through to get to Seattle, Washington? Now, comments included that Clark County, quote, lacked distinctive features, that it was marked with, quote, Wild West land use planning, that it is, quote, dark and old, and doesn't feel very appealing. And those of us who live in Clark County are, quote, less sophisticated. And finally, as if this is not enough, that Clark County is the, quote, white trash capital of the world. Now, this wasn't the Berkeley Barb. As the Columbian article continued, no one knew the name of Vancouver's mayor, none could name a Southwest Washington legislator, and only 2 could name 3 Clark County companies with more than 250 employees. There are about 30 to choose from. A few of those are Hewlett-Packard, SEH America, James River Corporation, Sharp Microelectronics, Boise Cascade, H.B. Fuller, Columbia Machine, Kyocera, Southwest Washington Medical Center, Frito-Lay, and Pacific Telecom. And people in the Portland metro area wonder why there at times seem to be some animosity directed toward them from their northern neighbors. But this attitude really does a disservice to both of our communities. Lewis Mumford, in discussing regional planning for the Portland metropolitan area more than 50 years ago, stated that people who pay more attention to abstract figures than to realities are accustomed to look upon a river as a dividing line. Rivers are dividing lines from only one point of view, military attack. From every other point of view, the river as a whole is a unit. This is certainly true with the original residents of the area, the Chinook salmon who traveled up the Columbia to the Washougal, as well as the Willamette rivers, the flocks of birds that travel from Beaverton and Milwaukee and Portland over to Sauvie Island for a little brunch, then on to the Vancouver Lake lowlands for some dinner, and then back home again. These are the area's original commuters, and they somehow managed to take care of business without worrying too much about which side of the political geography of the Columbia River they're on. Mike Houck always encourages me to brag about a few environmental issues, that we've got 353 heron rookery nests, but I won't tell you where they are. Our latest purchase of Frenchman's Bar, a place to swim and recreate and sailboard and not to drink. Part of the Pacific Flyway, a big part of the Ridgefield Wildlife Refuge National Preserve, which certainly is part of that green belt of Salmon Creek, Vancouver Lake lowlands, Columbia River, leading to the 6,000-acre Forest Park Reserve, into the Tuolin Mountains, one gigantic greenway and flyway for all of our citizens and animal life and plant life. So why should Portlanders worry about what happens in the county to their north, and why, for that matter, should those of us in Clark County care what Portlanders think? Because for better or for worse, in health and sickness, good times and bad, till death do us part, we are irreversibly linked together through our businesses, through our governments, and through our people. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some of the misconceptions that people seem to have about Clark County, Washington. First, let's look at the image of Clark County as the sleepy little bedroom community. I'm not sure if any of you have noticed, but Clark County is growing by leaps and bounds. Our population is growing at a dramatic rate, 18% in the last 4 years. In '92, the state of Washington's Office of Financial Management projected Clark County's population in the year 2000 as 290,000. But 5 years early, right now in 1995, we're already just short of that mark. And certainly we know that our challenge is not only related to traffic and congestion, but we've been working 6 years solid on breaking out of the bedroom community mode. 4% retail gas station, 96% residential, and we addressed that in the last 4 years in the Growth Management Act in the state of Washington. It's not just population that's booming. And we also recognize on our side of the river that bigger is not always greater. Clark County's economy is keeping up. Now, I could give you a lot of figures about housing starts, commercial startups, and other economic indicators that show that Clark County's economy is strong and getting stronger. But let me put this all in more personal terms. In the last year, Clark County has seen the openings of a McMenamin's Pub, a Machismo Mouse, Starbucks' first drive-through in the Portland area. I hope Coffee People is soon to come. And we hear that a Vancouver branch of Nature's Grocery is coming soon as well. Between '91 and '93, there were 96 new businesses in downtown Vancouver. And we started our farmers market about 3 years ago. Only 10 businesses had Saturday hours in the downtown Vancouver. Now more than 40 are keeping their doors open on Saturdays. Now, for those of you that think that their neighbors to the north are a bit less sophisticated, I'd like to point out that Clark County hosts 7 amateur theater companies, 2 dance theaters, the Vancouver Symphony, the Tears of Joy International Puppet Theater, which has received worldwide recognition. And we really do enjoy their beautiful focus on children of all ages. We're also home to Washington State University's Vancouver campus, just 25 miles north of the Benson Hotel, as the blue heron flies, of course, in the Salmon Creek area. This university, which has been operating on the Clark College campus in downtown Vancouver since 1989, will move to its brand new 370-acre campus in time for classes in the spring of 1996. It'll be a major university offering a wide range of undergraduate degrees, graduate degrees in education, business administration, engineering management, and public administration. We also like the growing network, Dr. Judith Romali of PSU with Washington State University, Clark College, Mount Hood Community College, and other schools that can be complementary in this network. If you go down temporarily on Measure 5, we can boost up with Washington State University. When we do something less than visionary, we can hopefully be propped up by our friends in Oregon, so that we as a region can move forward and not go backwards or sidestep for our young people's future. Let's take a look at the belief that Clark County is dominated by, quote, Wild West land use planning, end quote. There is some reason to believe that this impression is correct. In the last several years, Clark County has seen a development boom that is, frankly, unprecedented. But at the end of last year, Clark County we passed a comprehensive 20-year growth management plan. Major components of this adopted plan include 80-acre, and 40-acre minimum lot sizes for forest lands, a 20-acre minimum lot size for agricultural lands, 5-acre minimums in the rural areas, increased reserves of land set aside for industrial development, and an increased emphasis on getting people out of their cars as they travel from one place to another. The plan will not stop growth, and that wasn't our plan in the beginning, but it will help control urban sprawl by directing much of the growth into areas where urban services may be provided in a more efficient and cost-effective manner. This plan is very similar to the Portland metropolitan area's original growth plan and should mesh very well with whatever form Metro's Region 2040 plan ends up taking. In addition to our growth management plan, Clark County is taking the steps forward to ensure the protection of our natural resources. In the last several years, we have passed ordinances that protect our wetlands, control stormwater runoff, restrict the types of vegetation removed during development that has left much of the metropolitan area on both sides of the river when we do not do things correctly, looking more like Nebraska than the Pacific Northwest. At the same time, we're working to ensure the continued viability of agriculture and forest industries in Clark County for years to come. Certainly, on the human scale, we want more progressive steps toward more playgrounds, trails, protection of rivers, creeks, and streams, more emphasis on children-like activities that help our families and single-parent families, and to do less on the back end, which is regressive in terms of cleaning up after gang memberships increase and drive-by shootings. We want more and safe, affordable housing, and certainly more opportunities for all of our young people, and certainly for any of our people that are disenfranchised. Local politicians have recognized for a number of years that Clark County is strongly linked to the rest of the Portland area. A number of the Metro advisory committees now have members from Clark County to add a regional perspective, and I thank Ethan Seltzer and Dr. Judith Romaley for nominating and accepting Fran Tangen from the North Clark County area to serve on the board at the Public Policy Institute. She'll have a good perspective to share with our Oregonian neighbors. Organizations such as the Bi-State Policy Advisory Committee is made up of elected officials from throughout the Portland metro area. They work together to study and make recommendations on regional issues. And federal mandates issued to the Portland metro area, such as air quality requirements, impact Clark County, along with the other 9 counties in the close-by region. But we need to move past the point where only the elected officials recognize Clark County as part of the region. 45,000 Clark County residents make the trip south each day to work in the Portland area. 14,000 Oregonians travel into Clark County each day for their jobs. And even though governments on both sides of the river have been working on regional issues for years, I feel fairly comfortable in stating that not all of those 59,000 people traveling between the states each day are elected officials. The Columbia River does not begin to approach the Great Wall of China. It is not meant to keep people apart. In the coming years, despite the comments from naysayers on both sides of the Columbia, Clark County and the rest of the Portland metro region will become increasingly integrated, and the misconception we have about each other will surely diminish. And when that happens, we will finally be closer to reaching Lewis Mumford's vision of the Columbia River, not as something that divides two communities, but as a feature that brings our whole community closer together. Thank you.
that's a hard act to follow. My task this morning, or this noon, is to kind of follow up with both of these extremely articulate, knowledgeable individuals who are setting the policy for the region, try to give you a little insight from the technical standpoint, from the staff standpoint of what is happening between the two sides of the river, and to talk a little bit about what C-TRAN is. Many of the folks we find on the Portland side only recognize C-TRAN by the green buses or something they see on the transit mall every so often, that you get this sea of orange and all of a sudden some green vehicle comes by, and that must be them. And so to tell you a little bit about C-TRAN and introduce you a little bit to the workings that have been going on that have led us to this point and what we see prospectively is what I'd like to talk about a little bit. C-TRAN began as an experiment in Clark County. It was a wild notion in 1980 and in the late 1970s that anyone in Clark County would even consider wanting to ride transit, that if you wanted to ride a bus, you would go to Portland to ride a bus. I mean, that's where people rode buses, was in Portland. You didn't do that in Clark County. We were the county that drove and lived out in the sprawled out areas, and certainly we wanted to be the antithesis of Portland when we were on the Vancouver side, certainly far different than now. And so the elected officials came together and they took this experiment of what would happen if you had a regional transit system on the Clark County side to complement the Portland side. What would that mean, and whether or not it would be used was the key question. In the November 1980 general election, a time of great change, a sea change in the country, President Reagan was installed into office. Senator Magnuson was uninstalled in office in Washington State. C-TRAN, Clark County Public Transportation System, ventured forward and put its existence on the ballot and asked the voters to create a countywide transit authority and to give it the authority to levy a 0.3% sales tax and a 0.725% motor vehicle excise tax at a place where there had not been that type of taxing authority and transit system. The only thing that was in place was the City of Vancouver transit system, which had been funded by the City of Vancouver, not with a sales tax or any kind of direct taxing authority. And surprisingly, I think to many folks, 55% of the voters in Clark County said yes, and the measure passed, and C-TRAN was created on January 1, 1981. The remarkable thing is that in looking at that election and the results, that it passed not only in the urban area, but every incorporated community in Clark County, including Ridgefield, Battleground, La Center, Camas, Washougal, Yacolt, all passed it as well. And so there was a great recognition that there was a need for an alternative type of transportation. And in fact, C-TRAN as a countywide entity began to move forward. The boundaries of the system are the entire county. It inherited the City of Vancouver system, which was a 15-bus system operating in the confines of the City of Vancouver, operating approximately 6 days a week from 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night. From 1981, that modest start of 15 vehicles transporting approximately 400,000 passengers a year, the system has grown to 108 vehicles, transporting in excess of 4 million passengers per year, and the passenger growth rate right up to date through this month continues to be a 10% annual passenger growth rate each year over the year previous. It has exceeded the growth in population. The use of the system per capita continues to skyrocket, and it has one of the highest effectiveness ratings of transit systems for its size throughout the nation. Currently, C-TRAN employs 255 individuals. It operates fixed route and paratransit dial-a-ride services 7 days a week, 20 hours per day. It has 27 fixed routes with complementary paratransit service throughout the confines of Clark County. C-TRAN also operates express commuter service to Portland from major park and ride facilities in the north, the central, and the east Clark County areas, each of those operating at capacity. With the I-205 corridor operating on 15-minute headways and the I-5 corridor operating on 5-minute headways. It provides van pool services in both the Vancouver and the Clark County area, and also van pool services into Portland for major Portland employers. In 1990, the Washington State Legislature passed the Commute Trip Reduction Act, and that act required that major employers having over 100 employees, put together strategies that would reduce single occupancy vehicle arrivals at their plants during peak hours by 15% off of a 1992 base, by 15% by 1995, 25% by 1997, and 35% by 1999. C-TRAN was selected as the implementing agency to bring the 43 employers in Clark County that qualified under this act together in conjunction with the City of Vancouver and Clark County and the other jurisdictions to develop ordinances that would in fact put this into law. The statute at the state level required that the local communities enact ordinances with sanctions for non-compliance, and to work with the major employers so that it was a cooperative effort to put strategies in place that would achieve compliance with these goals. And then finally to act as a technical assistant to provide services and to provide training for on-site transportation coordinators who have to facilitate the implementation of these plans at each individual plant in Clark County to meet these goals. I have to tell you that at the County Commission and at the City Councils throughout Clark County, it was one of the few occasions where you saw an ordinance being enacted which required employers to do something and impose sanctions in the absence of doing something, where the people who stood up and endorsed it and asked for its passage were the very major employers who it was intended to regulate. And so we feel that we had a major accomplishment in bringing that plan into implementation. We were the first county in the state to have all the ordinances in place, all the plans adopted, and in fact we will meet our 1995 goal of trip reductions, and we believe that we will continue to meet those goals in 1997 and 1999. As you are obviously aware, we are involved in high-capacity transit planning at C-TRAN, and we work closely with TriMet and Metro and the City of Portland, Clark County, the City of Vancouver. On the public side, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the Regional Transportation Council, but on the private side, closely with the Economic Development Council, the Chamber of Commerce, and others in Clark County to ensure that we have a plan that comes out that is responsive to the interest of all. We have a ways to go on that yet. We are currently also involved in the Growth Management Act planning, the Growth Management Act that required the development of new comprehensive plans, and most particularly involved in two areas. One, concurrency management. And by way of explaining concurrency, it's simply a principle adopted in the Act and in the plan that says that if you're going to have new development, you ought to at least have some plan as to how you're going to serve it with schools and transportation. An unheard of concept. And therefore, you have to have, when you submit the plan to the state, a concurrency management plan that shows how the transportation system will meet the development that's going to be in place and what facilities you're going to build to accommodate that. C-TRAN's been actively involved with the jurisdictions in doing that. The other one is the adoption of a transit overlay zone, which actually sets a reversal for Clark County of some of the key components in zoning in transit, major transit corridors and around transit station areas, which sets parking maximums rather than parking minimums, and sets density minimums rather than density maximums, an inversion in order to begin to focus development in the areas where we'll have a transportation system to accommodate it. Our bi-state relationships are strong. They started from the beginning of C-TRAN. We took on a unique concept, a concept that you will not find in any other major metropolitan area in the nation that has more than one transit system serving it. And that is that someone who bought a ticket to ride C-TRAN ought to be able to use that ticket on TriMet, and somebody that bought a ticket to ride TriMet ought to be able to use that ticket on C-TRAN, and that the two ought to be seamless. What an unbelievable thought. If you go through any other community in the country, Seattle, the Bay Area, Los Angeles, any major metropolitan area, you will find that if you buy a particular type of ticket or script on one transit system or a transfer, you cannot use it on another when you have to repay the fare, and in many cases the schedules are not even coordinated to time transfer. From its inception, C-TRAN has worked with TriMet, and TriMet has been a tremendous partner in working together to make this happen. We have complete fare reciprocity. We have service integration so that when our commuter buses get to Gateway, they meet the trains that are coming in from Gresham and coming out from Portland, so that those transfers are made seamlessly. Our vehicles, our buses are on the transit mall operating under the jurisdiction of TriMet while they're there. TriMet operates in Vancouver under contract to C-TRAN under our jurisdiction while they're over there. And the two agencies very harmoniously have operated over the course of the past few years. In the area of planning, we now have expanded that to where the Washington State Department of Transportation is financing planning engineering interns over at TriMet so that they can begin to learn about other modes besides just the highway side. So we have a close working relationship with TriMet and with the other agencies on this side of the river. The south-north planning structure is also cross-directorate. JPAC, as was mentioned, has 3 Clark County members. The Technical Committee has Clark County members. The South-North Steering Group has 5 Clark County members. The South-North Citizens Advisory Committee has 5 Clark County members. On our side of the river, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the Regional Transportation Council, has 2 Oregon members that sit on the Board of Directors. All of the technical committees are cross-pollinated. We have different taxing structures, which cause us some difficulties at times, and yet they're things that we recognize as just challenges that we have to address. TriMet uses a payroll tax, it uses property tax for system development, and has other taxing authority. Enviously on this side of the river, or on our side of the river, we look at TriMet and with some envy because much of that authority is imposable. On the Washington side of the river, any kind of transit taxing mechanism has to be voter approved, and the only 2 that are currently available under state law are sales taxes and motor vehicle excise taxes. That's not a particular problem in the majority of the state. In our part of the world, it is a major problem. 7.6% sales tax next to 0 is quite a leap. And I can tell you that I just bought new license plates and they ran me $397 for 1 year. That's quite a jump from $30 for 2. So to add to those 2 taxing sources is very difficult, and yet those are the only 2 that are made available to transit to both operate a conventional bus service and also for high capacity transit. Washington state law, unlike Oregon law, requires that any major investments like light rail must have both operating and capital components submitted to the voters simultaneously. You cannot submit a construction-only project without having the operating piece in. Both states are similar in the fact that they restrict their gas tax to highway purposes only. Finally, in the legislative structure, both legislatures have transportation committees. The Oregon legislature meets once every 2 years. The Washington legislature meets annually. Recently, that seemed like perennial or indefinitely, but they do meet annually, so it gives us a few more opportunities to meet with them. The Washington State Legislative Transportation Committee has a great deal more power than the transportation committees in the Oregon legislature in that they can raise taxes and appropriate funds directly to the floor of both houses without going through Ways and Means, Revenue, or any of the other corresponding committees. They also have an 18-member full-time staff, and they have full control of both in-session and out-session of their budget. So they do exercise quite a bit of control over the transportation function. Let me conclude just saying this, that in amplifying what Commissioner Blumenauer and Commissioner Magnano have said, that we have a great deal in common. We see it every day in the hundreds of meetings that the technical staffs have in working together with each other, and we have some things that are unique that separate us that only serve as challenges that need to be overcome, not obstacles that can't be. The relationship is mutually beneficial. We see a great deal of misconceptions on our side of the river as far as Portland is concerned, and we also have many misconceptions about our own identity, and that is probably the heart of some of the difficulties that we face on a daily basis. I recall on a routine basis the poll that one of our members of Congress did in Clark County a few years ago, and he took a poll in East Clark County to see what the sensitivity was to the political climate. And 47% of the people he surveyed, and he surveyed a fairly large number of people, 47% of the people surveyed in East Clark County thought Neil Goldschmidt was the governor. And so he knew that he had an identity problem. That stems from the fact that much of our media comes from Portland, and that has its positive impacts and it has its negative impacts. And though that is one of the things that we're going to have to work more diligently on in Clark County to assure ourselves that the Portland media is reflecting back to us the kind of image that's accurate and that is informative about Clark County events. The elected officials in Clark County have made some tough decisions. This is a community that has gone from first gear to high gear without passing second, third, and fourth in between. We have taken on the land use decisions that Oregon took on over a course of a 20-year period. We've done it in a 4-year period. We've taken on a transportation system planning effort that Oregon did over 15 years, and we've done it over 3 years. We've recognized in the economic development and livable wage areas that we are falling dramatically behind the rest of the region, and we have to have strategies to address those issues. And so in each of these cases, what we've done is experienced a wake-up call. We've attempted to accelerate the planning process, and what we have to look at now is how we make sure that the remainder of the public that's not been involved in these discussions has an opportunity to participate, to recognize the existence of the problems, and to be a participant in the formulation of the solutions. And that the solutions not only have to work for Clark County, but they have to work for the entire 4-county region. Because as one area of the Northwest region, of our Northwest region prospers, all parts of the Northwest region prosper. Thank you.
We thank you for that fine whirlwind tour of Clark County, its attitudes, its transportation, and other systems. Now it's an opportunity to hear questions from City Club members. We'll go to 20 minutes after 1 today to fulfill Commissioner Magnano's desire for a lively, interactive discussion during the Q&A session. And we'll begin with Paula Kopel.
I have 2 questions related to the recent light rail vote in Clark County. And the first question is directed to Commissioner Magnano and also to Mr. White. It seems like one of the points that all 3 of you were making is how much there is a need for better understanding between south of the river and across the river in Clark County. And it seems to me that the base for more cooperation really comes from a sense of shared values. What's been so disconcerting in the wake of the vote on February 7th is for people in the Portland area to figure out, are those in Clark County like us or are they not? Do they have the same values that we do with respect to compact, well-planned growth and the importance of transit in maintaining livability? Or do they not? So I'd like to ask the 2 of you if you feel that the majority of people in Clark County do believe in those things, and if you do feel that way, on what do you base that conclusion? And then if I can ask one other of Commissioner Blumenauer.
We're running out of time.
Okay, but my second question is, there's been so much talk about changing or looking at the specifics of the South-North project. I'd just like Commissioner Blumenauer to give us a big picture view of what's really at stake here.
I would answer the very things that you're wondering about Clark County. I think that that is the opportunity for the first time in a light rail vote that Clark County at a crossroads, our citizens needed to ask about you folks. Do we want to, now that we may be at a dance together, do we want to dance? And do we even want to be joined at the dance? And we have people that see themselves as extremely rural and have those highly individualistic, strong down-home values in Clark County. We have people on the I-205 corridor that feel that they're in a challenging, congested area. We have suburban communities. We have a mix of communities and many legitimate feelings among those people. That was reflected in a 2-to-1 vote against light rail. First time we ran the issue, proposed it as elected officials in front of our citizens. This time around, the initial dance, people chose legitimately for hundreds and hundreds of reasons that they either didn't have enough answers, price tag was too big, or they may have wanted it on the I-205 and not the I-5 to start it out. Or they may have wanted it closer to Washington State University rather than only ending at 99th Street in Hazeldale. And there were a number of my friends that told me they voted against it because they value some of the hometown values that they have chosen in Clark County and did not necessarily want to get hooked into real or perceived notions of higher levels of urban crime and violence and fear. I would also say, as our mayor of Vancouver, Bruce Hagenson, mentioned, the first time we proposed a library for the community, people, for whatever valid reasons, didn't support it. A couple, 3 elections later, they did support it. As I mentioned in the State of the County address last week at the Red Lion in Vancouver, those people that voted for or against light rail had legitimate reasons to do so. The challenge now is to find out what questions remain unanswered and what other forms of solution do our citizens want to growing congestion and gridlock. Les?
Well, thank you, John. I think, Paula, you also want to recognize that there is a great deal of similarity in the values in Clark County and the values in Portland, because the vast majority of our in-migration is in fact Portland residents moving over. So to a great degree, we're you. When we look at what is on the mind of people in Clark County right now, what you can see is a great concern about whether or not Clark County is going to have any level of self-sufficiency and economic self-sufficiency carrying into the next century. The report that the Economic Development Council in Clark County issued that showed that over the past 10 years we have actually lost ground in our average wage paid. We have gone from 100% of U.S. national average down to 87% of U.S. national average in Clark County in wages paid, was really disconcerting, because it means that we are not going to have in our community the ability to fund the infrastructure and the services and the things that are critical for us to maintain the quality of life that is a value I think is shared on both sides of the river. The real question is, what is the best means to find our way back to the economic prosperity that we all desire? Is that in a rail connection that allows us to put urban densities at a higher level, allows us to accumulate densities in residential and commercial uses so we can protect our industrial land and go out and facilitate more industrial development to accommodate our growth? Or is it in fact walling ourselves off from the other parts of the region and trying to become a solely self-contained entity? And that discussion is going to have to continue for a while for people to really come to grips with what's the best way to proceed. But the value, the desire to have a good quality of life, clean air, clean water, room for our kids to stay here so that we don't have a community that only is able to be economically prosperous if our kids leave, so that every graduation you see a flurry of suitcases as a gift, that in fact we've got room for our kids to be here and have living wage jobs. If that I think is a shared value on both sides of the river. And so what we're really talking about is what's the best means to achieve that. And I think when the dialogue is concluded and people really see that this is something that they have to do, they'll do the heavy lifting. And I saw that in our school election of a year ago, just a year ago this last month, where voters in Evergreen and Vancouver school districts passed $250 million of school bonds by a 60% majority, which is required in Washington State, in order to facilitate the upgrade in the school system. When the citizens see that the problem is there and they agree upon the means to address it, they'll come together and put the wherewithal behind it. And we've just got some more discussion to take place in order to get there.
If voters had been able, as some had attempted, to force an election on the first max line, I don't think it would have passed. The next election we had for the west side, the first one, you may recall, although a statewide election, was unsuccessful. There is no shortcut to providing the citizen infrastructure. We've had 6 years of citizen-based work on this side of the river. I think that as we work together to identify what that big picture is, allow people to focus on their questions and provide them the answers that they need in a way that they can cope with it, I'm confident we'll get there. But there is no shortcut. And even though this was a negative and I think an unfortunate vote, there's no question in my mind we have to continue to look at ways to tie the two together, and I haven't heard anything that indicates that that's impossible.
Our second 30-second question will come from Doug.
Hard to do. I was a member of the City Club Research Committee, which reviewed planning ties between the Oregon and Washington sides of the river and concluded that more formal ties were needed, including voting representation on Metro. And I guess looking at the various areas besides transportation, land use, water, air quality, if it's not light rail, where can we look to continue to build our ties, maybe in a more formal way, to find some victory that brings our two sides of the river closer together?
I would, without a great deal of reflection time, I would say that in our Department of Ecology, Department of Environmental Quality, DOE, DEQ, we're doing that. In a confederation of chambers of commerce, we can do better across the river. We have private sector and public sector involved on the Columbia River water quality study, and on and on and on. Our presentation to the subcommittee of the Portland City Club 2 years ago surprised the various male and female members of the club that we were working together so frequently. Now, how to get more formalized and more effective in those bi-state interlocal agreements so that citizens feel they're actually being served and not being disserved.
I think that you're going to see a broad number of issues that begin to come out of this relationship that's established through the transportation planning process. Clearly, air quality comes to mind immediately. We both live in a constrained airshed that limits our ability to bring in new economic development. We both have the desire to see economic prosperity in the region. And to the degree that we can bring in standardized approaches from both sides of the river that begin to address those issues and work toward common goals, I think that improves the situation for both of us. For many years, Clark County devoted all of its attention to stationary emission strategies and was unmindful of any mobile emission strategies whatsoever. On the Oregon side, mobile emission strategies were the high point of the attempt to bring emissions down. And so we did not work collectively to come to a region-wide strategy so that we had a coordinated effort. As a result, downtown improved. It was no longer a violator of air quality standards, but out in the suburban areas, and Clark County included, that violation continued. So as we bring those strategies together where we have commonality, whether it's the Columbia River or whether it's air quality, those things that we share, I think that you're going to see a lot more discussion and common development of strategies on both sides of the river because it benefits both of us. We can pollute the entire airshed all by ourselves, and we shouldn't be allowed to, and you shouldn't want us to, and we shouldn't want to.
Next question.
Ted Kay, City Club member. A question about the third bridge crossing. In 1988, that idea was defeated in Metro. The 2040 plan doesn't contemplate a third bridge crossing over the Columbia, but I understand a couple of weeks ago the C-TRAN board has decided to study the issue again. What's going on?
The C-TRAN board has said that we have to have a dialogue that addresses the concerns of the community. And one of the concerns of the community that was articulated in this campaign was a lack of recognition that a third bridge would not leap onto the horizon if they simply defeated the rail measure. And so what we're asking, what the board is asking the community to do, and we're setting up a task force to do, is to examine not to study a third bridge per se as to how it would be built and that sort of thing, but to talk with our regional partners, citizen to citizen, on this issue so that the folks that are the proponents of the third bridge on our side of the river who have not engaged their counterparts on the Portland side of the river can have a dialogue about the reality, the feasibility of that prospect. Because if we agree that there is a problem, there is an access problem between the two states in the region, and the solution that is developed on the Clark County side is a bridge, and the solution on the Portland side is not a bridge, what you've actually done is created nothing. You have impasse, and impasse does not solve the problem. And so we're attempting through this, this dialogue to have people begin to talk to each other, not technical staff to technical staff or elected official to elected official, but citizen to citizen to get to those shared values that Paula asked about earlier.
At this juncture, we'll end our broadcasting, but I know Ray Polani would never forgive me if we don't give him an opportunity on his favorite subject here to ask one more question. So, Ray?
Thank you very much. It's really